This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, and I am your host for this week, Paul Jasley, filling in for the incredible Mike Rappin. But I'm not alone. I'm joined by two of my favorite people to talk about comic books with, Nick White.
Hey.
And Kait Lamphere.
Hi.
Well, we're back with another episode this week, and it's an exciting topic, one that I think we have a lot more to say than I think we might assume, if that makes sense. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's start off with the most important question we could ever ask each other. How have you been? What comics have you read? Let's start with you, Kait.
I've been good. I went through and purged my to-read pile, or my to-read mountain, I should say. I didn't have space for it along with the Christmas tree because they take up the same place in my apartment.
Okay.
So I went through and I put away all of the unread volumes, and I basically gave all of Brian's comics back to him, which was a very large stack of Mighty Thor and a whole bunch of mini series and number ones that I was interested in and haven't read for possibly 4 years. So so now it's just my unread comics. So we'll see how long that takes me. Probably another 4 years to read all of them. Recently I read Sweetness and Lightning Volume 1, and referring back to the giant pile of unread comics that I own, I got this out of the library.
Nice.
Which is one of the reasons I haven't read the ones I own.
Of course.
This book is by Guido Amagakure, I think. And it's a manga about a young man who's raising his very young daughter. The man's wife died fairly recently in the story, and the daughter is super into delicious food, but this guy doesn't know how to cook. So he feels really bad about constantly taking her out to eat or getting frozen meals. And this young girl meets a young woman at a park, and the young woman invites them back to her mother's restaurant, only it turns out that the mother is like semi-famous and never around, and the restaurant isn't ever really open, but it's always stocked. It's very unexplained in that way. Okay. But the young woman and the daughter end up becoming pretty close friends, and it turns out that the man, the father, is some kind of teacher, and he's this girl's teacher. So if I continue on with issue number 2, I'm wondering if it's going to get like awkward between the woman and the man. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it seems like she likes him a little bit. So I didn't really like that part. Like, I was happy with this new friendship and all of these food images. But it was a very cute story. And the artist did a really good job making the food look delicious. Like, the expressions on especially the daughter's face is like, I had to go and find something to eat immediately. And if I continue with volume number 2, I'm gonna have to get like some carrots or something, so the things that I find to eat aren't like chocolate or 3 sleeves of crackers. Sure. And luckily there are recipes for everything that they make in the back of the book. And it's mostly Asian dishes, or it's all Asian dishes. So I'm going to have to go to like an Asian food store to find some of these things, but it's probably going to happen.
That sounds very appealing. Like, I love the idea of a cooking manga. I'm sure there's this other story going on, but the most important part is like, let's get some new recipes and look at some delicious food. Like, that sounds very appealing. Yeah.
I think this might be a show on Crunchyroll too.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
I don't know. I've never had an account on that website, but maybe I'll get one.
I love how this book just sort of like turns the corner, and it's like, hey, Kait, like, how do you feel about, I don't know, feelings in this book? And Kate's like, no, thank you, please. No, thank you. I'll stick to the food.
Give me those ramen recipes. Yeah.
I don't need romance.
Yep. There's enough romance in comics. I cannot just have friendships and some recipes in this one.
That sounds great. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
What about you, Nick? What have you been reading?
Well, I've been pretty busy lately. We've been relocating my grandmother to live closer to my family. She was in Holland, and we moved her a bit closer, so that's taken up a Well, I think most people can relate. It's one of those things that, like, even if you plan and you organize and you think that you've structured everything out and whatnot, it's one of those things that will ultimately unfurl into something massively bigger than whatever, regardless of however much you planned. It's just something that's going to be bigger than whatever you planned for. So that's made up a lot of the last couple days. But I have found time for some reading. I've been reading Hellboy Omnibus 2, while at the same time B.P.R.D. Omnibus 1. These are both largely written by Mike Mignola. In terms of Hellboy, he's largely drawing most of this volume. In terms of B.P.R.D., I don't think he's drawing any of it. Dave Stewart, of course, is pretty much doing colors on all of it. And it's one of those situations where it's like, look, I know most of us didn't, like, we didn't get in on the ground floor when Hellboy was coming out, like 1994 or whatever. You know, none of us have first editions or whatever. None of us are an HBOG, as I've coined the term. I think I've just ultimately destroyed, you know, whatever hipness any of those terms had, I guess. And so we've been left trying to read it via trades and omnibuses, and sometimes, like, if we're really dumb, we'll ignore the fact that this content has been curated for us, and we'll just scour the internet for proper reading order lists because we're stupid, or I'm stupid. And ultimately, I decided that what I wanted to do was juggle Hellboy and B.P.R.D. and read them in the order they came out, so that you know, you're bouncing back and forth in a way that doesn't get confusing and I guess ultimately feels meaningful. I don't know. And because ultimately B.P.R.D. kicks off when Hellboy leaves the B.P.R.D. because, like, that's like rule number 37 of superhero books. If you join a superhero team, you have to quit it. That's just
of course.
You know, them's the rules.
Yeah.
And so it just became a huge mess because with these omnibuses, they're not really putting everything in release order, because with a lot of these, like, small little, like, 8-page or 10-page stories that Mike Mignola did and his editors are like, I don't know where to fucking put this thing. They're like, we're just going to throw it aside, and when we have enough of these things, we're going to do a short story collection, right? Except that sort of messes up release order and sometimes messes up canon. Anyway, the point is that I made things massively too hard for myself because this is like Hellboy, so it really doesn't matter. It's ultimately like opening up your package of M&Ms and sorting them out by color. I mean, you've accomplished something, and maybe you feel like you've brought order to a universe, but it's meaningless. Like, that's how I feel about what I've done with my free time. So
I think that's one of the big hurdles I know I've had with getting into Hellboy, is that not knowing the order to read it, but also I feel like that's not that important because
that's the paradox.
Right. Isn't the major appeal of Hellboy aesthetic mainly? Like, Mike Mignola's art is the biggest appeal of the whole book?
I mean, the writing is, I think the untold secret about Hellboy is that, honestly, Mike Mignola is a massively better author than I think most people would think.
Right.
That's sort of the big secret for me. But, yeah, it's kind of a mess. And if you're reading with omnibuses, then it becomes an even bigger mess. So,
okay.
I did read a short story in it that I did really enjoy called The Killer in My Skull, written by Mignola, drawn by Matthew Dow Smith, inks by Ryan Sook, colors by Dave Stewart. So it's a pretty big all-star dream team there. Yeah. And it's the introduction to Lobster Johnson, one of his characters, and this sort of illustrates how big of a mess this is. So it's an intro to Lobster Johnson, but it's ultimately a backup story within a Hellboy issue that got collected in a B.P.R.D. short story trade and then in a B.P.R.D. omnibus. So good luck sorting this stuff out. It was a fun little story. It's about Lobster Johnson trying to figure out why people are being killed in their own homes by their furniture.
Okay.
And it made me think of the Lonely Island song YOLO, which, and I quote the lyrics, 2 words about furniture killing machines. So, it was fun. But Hellboy is, TLDR, Hellboy is a mess. It's a great book. They're both great books, but it's a mess, but only if you make it one, I guess. Just read the book, people. Just read the book. Don't go on the internet.
Yeah.
Don't go find another book. Don't go find people's streamlined reading lists, or don't go to howtoread.com or whatever it's called. Just read the book. Okay?
I think that's good. I think that's something that a lot of people don't take advantage of, the idea of just diving headfirst into a universe or a series and just kind of fighting your way through it, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's got to plan things out. They have to
Yeah.
have their roadmap, and
Yeah.
it's what do they call that? FOMO, fear of missing out, or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Everyone's worried about that. Beyond that, I also read Lazarus X plus 66. This is the Lazarus collection that sort of, I think, stemmed from the idea that following the 2016 election, which, however you feel about politics, whatever, just know that I think it really shattered Greg Rucka to the core, if I recall correctly. And he's like, I can't really do Lazarus right now. I want to step back a little bit, but I still kind of want to do something. So he co-wrote all 6 of these issues, each one focusing on a singular character or a pair of characters from Lazarus that perhaps are a little bit more peripheral. And he brought in a team of artists, one for each issue, to draw them. So we had Steve Lieber, who did the Fix, Mac Chatter from Briggsland, Justin Greenwood from The Fuse, Aletha Martinez from World of Wakanda, I'm going to botch this one, Bilquis Evely from Wonder Woman, God, she's so amazing, and Tristan Jones, who did Alien Defiance. And I thought it was a really perfectly executed attempt to kind of give a nice glimpse into these different characters, each of which really wouldn't have merited a full miniseries on their own, but to get 22 or 26 pages and just get a little glimpse into their world I found really worthwhile. And what I thought was the perfect compromise is that I think with something like this, the skeptic in me is bound to think, okay, this is to tide us over. It's not going to really have any forward momentum, basically. There aren't going to be any stakes with this, you know what I mean? Like, nothing's going to really be put on the line. This is the piece of bread you eat while you're waiting for dinner to roll around, right? Mm-hmm. Or Cheez-Its or whatever, the package of M&Ms I mentioned earlier. I don't, whatever it is for you do you. But there's actually some real forward progress in this. It follows up directly where Volume 5 Cull ended, and it offers up it answers some lingering questions, and it asks some in turn. If I had to just briefly say like what my 2 favorite stories were, I would probably say Casey Solomon's story. She's a soldier that was nominated for Dagger training. Dagger is basically elite forces of the Carlisle family. It follows her going through Dagger training. That was drawn by Lieber. The other one I would definitely say would be Mac Chatter's issue, where he talks about Joachim Moray of the Moray family, who used to be allied with the Carlisles, but I don't want to say too much. Some really bad stuff went down at the end of Volume 5. So, those are some things I read, and I would definitely recommend both a lot, especially if you love Lazarus. Get on this book. If you thought this was a stopgap or filler or irrelevant, it's not. It's really, really solid, and it's an interesting experiment.
Do you think that this could be read separately? Like if I've never read Lazarus before?
Oh no, definitely not. Oh, definitely not. Let me be very clear. Don't touch this book if you haven't read Lazarus, and allow me to be more specific. Don't read this book if you're not through Volume 5 of Lazarus.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Some more library books for me in my future.
Oh, Lazarus is so good. Read it.
I think I did read some of it. I think I have read a few issues.
Okay, that sounds good. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I've been good. I have, like Kate, been ignoring my to-read pile and instead gone to the library to get some books, specifically the digital library. I've used the Hoopla app to read a bunch of stuff this past week. Some of it good, some of it not so good. So let's start with the good stuff. I finally read the Flintstones series that DC did for the past couple of years, written by Mark Russell with art by Steve Pugh. That was surprisingly good. I mean, I have no nostalgia for the Flintstones. I mean, that's predates even me, and I'm pretty old, but the Flintstones is probably even older than me. I remember seeing the movies in the theater, maybe. That's kind of the only experience I really have with the Flintstones. But what's nice is that this book also doesn't have any nostalgia for the characters, really. Instead, it uses the characters, that modern Stone Age family of the Flintstones, to do a very smart social satire of the current world that we live in, contemporary politics, consumer culture, religion. It kind of hits on all those, and it's pretty scathing. Like, I'm surprised just how much leeway DC and Hanna-Barbera gave Mark Russell to go with this stuff. There's
totally. Like, I was shocked with okay. It was the whole Hanna-Barbera thing seems like completely hands off for this book and for others. It's like, just do whatever you want. I mean, if Barney Rubble shows up in it, great. I mean, you've fulfilled our end of the bargain then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's what's kind of great about it, is that if you're expecting it to be kind of a hokey throwback series, it's not. Like, it is a very smart comic book. Mark Russell's a very funny writer, and he's a very smart writer, and I think he does some interesting stuff with this book, and it never feels heavy-handed. Like, it's not him making political points, but there's enough of that to make it interesting.
It's not a polemic.
There's one issue where there's a group of people living in Bedrock who are opposed to monogamy because it's unnatural. Because before monogamy, before marriage, everyone just went to the sex cave and procreated there. There wasn't an idea of marriage. And then, so of course, Wilma and Fred are married, so they go to a couples retreat, a marriage counseling, thing, and that gets broken into by the protesters. There's also two characters named Adam and Steve that want to get married, and the guy who's running the marriage, like couples retreat says, "Oh, no, that's not right. I didn't sign up for that." Of course, then Fred Flintstone has to talk him down and say, "Look, no, that's just as valid as any other marriage. It's just two people that care for each other." And it's a nice story about monogamy and marriage, but it is a very satirical look at the topic, and the issues surrounding it. So, and there's a bunch of issues about religion, and like the church tries to invent new gods for them to worship, and each one fails. And finally they're worshiping animals, it's animism, and then like, oh, well, how about an invisible god? Oh, what's his name? Oh, I don't know. Let's call him Gerald. So there's a recurring thing where characters are saying, "Holy Gerald" and stuff. So it's a very funny book. The artwork is actually really good in it. So I highly recommend this. If you're skeptical about being a sort of topical and funny Flintstones book, it really is. So I highly recommend it. The other book I read, which I wasn't quite as thrilled about, was the Batman White Knight miniseries by Sean Murphy. This is an 8-issue miniseries that Sean Murphy did for DC. This is one of their first, the DC Black Label books, the imprint that they're doing, which is more sort of quote-unquote adult takes on the characters.
Edgy. It's too edgy for me, probably.
Exactly. You're not cool enough.
Must be an 8 on the edgy scale to pick up this book, yeah.
There's some interesting ideas in this book. So basically the premise is that the Joker in this book, who is actually Jack Napier, who's become the Joker. They go with the canonical Joker story from the first Tim Burton Batman movie.
Yeah,
it's a red flag for me right off the bat. But in this story, he ends up taking this sort of taking some pills that basically cure him, quote unquote, of being the Joker. So he's back to being Jack Napier. And he begins organizing a poor neighborhood in Gotham to stand up to the Gotham Police Department for siding with Batman. And they cite all this stuff like, look, Batman causes $3 billion a year in property damage, fighting crime.
So, let's show your work. Okay, here's my work. Yeah. He's a menace.
And then, so he goes to the, the sort of impoverished, disenfranchised neighborhood of Gotham, organizes them to stand up to the GCPD. There we go. GRPD is my local police department.
I was going to say, Paul.
So there's some interesting ideas. I mean, but that's such like a freshman philosophy 101 take on Batman. It's like, oh, Batman's just as bad as the villains. I'm like, well, of course he is. Of course he's destroying city blocks. It's also a made up story. Gotham's not real. So I like the idea of there being a neighborhood in Gotham that isn't thrilled with Batman. That's an interesting idea. Maybe Batman doesn't go to that neighborhood, or maybe the cops don't go to that neighborhood, and there's a story there to be told. The problem is Sean Murphy over-explains that concept in every issue. So you have 8 issues of him telling the same exact, thing over and over again. And he front-loads it with a bunch of, contemporary language. Like they use the term SJW a bunch in this book. They use the term white knight a bunch in this book. Which, yeah, it feels so heavy-handed. I think it could have been a more nuanced way to tell the same story. It's also one of those Batman stories where the creator feels the need to include every one of the rogues gallery in the story. So there's part of the story. I know, my thoughts exactly.
Paul, I just got to say, like, I'm sure I told you this before, but like, I was waiting for someone to bite the bullet on this book before me, and waiting for someone else to like walk into the fire and come out unscathed or whatever, just so I could hear it from someone else. So I thank you, because you're doing the Lord's work here. I knew this book was going to be probably pretty and dumb, and probably pretty dumb. So
pretty dumb.
Yeah,
that's. I will say,
Batman and the Joker, they're not that different after all. Yes, we know. We know.
There's that element. The problem is that he includes all the rogues gallery, so you have the Penguin, Riddler, Bane, all those characters.
Freeze? Is there at least Mr. Freeze?
The Mr. Freeze stuff is actually the most interesting part of the book. There's a lot there with Mr. Freeze. The rest of the rogues gallery ends up being mind controlled by Harley Quinn, or a fake Harley Quinn. So they actually don't have anything to do in the book. They just show up in the background a bunch. But that's kind of my bottom line with this book, is that I'm willing to read a bad Batman comic as long as it looks nice, and this one looks really nice. Sean Murphy is a fantastic artist, and there's a lot of stuff in this book where he'll draw. There's a bunch of different Batmobiles in the book, and he obviously draws the ones from the movies, the one from the animated series, and they look right. They're on model. They look great. There's a lot of like little visual nuances and Easter eggs in the stuff in the book that I really like. But the story itself probably could have been done more streamlined. If this was 4 or 5 issues, it would have been perfect. At 8 issues, it's kind of a slog. So I don't know. I think
it sounds like Murphy was basically looking for some sort of excuse or construct to more or less draw everything Batman.
Yeah. And I think you see that a lot with Batman books where like a writer finally gets there. I mean, that's what, Long Halloween or Hush are. I mean, Hush is the best example of that. It's like, let's throw every possible idea I have about Batman into one book. It doesn't quite work always. I will say, if you can get it for free from the library, it's kind of worth checking out because it does look so lovely. But I mean, don't expect a mind-blowing Batman story. So,
can I ask a very specific question about this book?
Sure.
Is there a point where Batman looks into a mirror and the Joker's on the other side of the mirror? Does this happen? It doesn't quite get
that heavy-handed.
Oh, thank God!
It avoids that level of ham-fisted story
on the nose.
Yeah, but yeah. So there's that. At least I read it for free. I'll say that. But those are the books that we read. Let's talk about books that we're excited to read, because comic books, of course, come out this Wednesday, December 5th. Kate, is there a book that you're most excited to read this week?
So the first issue of the final arc of The Wicked and the Divine comes out on Wednesday. Ooh. And I just caught up by reading 1373 AD and issue 39. And I loved the special. I loved this special. I haven't loved all of the specials. But this one was very good, and it filled in some backstory. So going into issue number 40, I'm really intrigued to find out basically how that becomes relevant. The new revelations become relevant to the larger plot line. And there's been a whole lot of backstory being filled in the last arc or two. So more and more we understand how their mythology works, the whole rebirth of the gods every however many years. So I'm anticipating that the concluding arc of this story is going to be pretty huge. I mean, this has been 5 years in the making, so...
Sure, yeah.
The other thing that I'll say is that someday I'm going to have to go back and reread this entire series after it's been completed, because there are so many details and so many subplots that I've been lost sometimes as to what they were talking about or what they were referencing, because there's so much of it. So I'm very excited to see this crazy, wild, wonderful series wrap up, and someday I'm going to do a complete reread.
Yeah, this is definitely a book that's been on my radar to go back and read. I remember reading probably the first 10 or 12 issues of it and liking it, but maybe it's that thing where there's so much going on where reading it month to month didn't quite work. So now that's kind of wrapping up, I have an excuse finally, or I don't have an excuse anymore. I have to go back and reread the whole thing,
Yeah.
What about you, Nick? What are you excited for this week?
For me, it would have to be Ninja K 14. This will be the last issue of Ninja K, which of course is the slightly shorter series following up on Matt Kint's 2-year-plus run on Ninjak. This book is written by Christos Gage, penciled by Roberto De La Torre, colors by Jose Villarrubia, letters by Dave Lanphier. I recently read 11 and 12. I haven't yet gotten to my shop to pick up 13. And yeah, I'm really sad that this is kind of the last issue. Gage obviously didn't have as much time or room as Matt Kint did. I'd honestly say he only had about half, but he sort of really managed to avoid that tonal whiplash that you get when you sort of have a passing of the torch. Valiant's always been really careful to sort of provide some indicators that even when a book sort of stops and then resumes, that it takes a different tonal shift, or frequently they even sort of make subtle changes even to the title of the book. Like I think Archer and Armstrong, when it came back, and I know this is goofy and stupid, but it was sort of a little subtle indicator when it got rebooted, it became Archer ampersand Armstrong, in the same way that Ninjak became Ninja K, which was also sort of a tip of the hat to the idea that he was one in a long succession of these ninjas working for MI6. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What I really liked about Gage's run up to this point was that you don't find many writers who sort of are basically taking on a fill-in role of sorts, or a follow-up role of sorts, that are really eager to engage in a broader canon discussion. They sort of are a little bit tepid or nervous about that, and they tend to exist within their own self-contained universe, or keep things very insular or one-shot-ish or whatnot. And yet, Gage just steps right in, and he just interacts with Harbinger Wars 2, Armor Hunters from a couple years back, Eternal Warrior's absence over the last couple years, and yes, maybe a lot of credit needs to be given here to Valiant's editors, and they probably had a large part in this as well. But Gage was willing to engage in that, and I'm pretty impressed with it, honestly. It's a book that really is meant for those that are more privy to what the last couple years of Valiant titles have been about, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm not trying to be elitist here and say like, oh, this is for the hardcore Valiant fans, but merely to say that it's a nice alternative from the current market that's all about, oh, new number one, great jumping on point, start the book here, begin this now, even though a lot of those points are just frequently disingenuous all the time. So it'll be the last issue. He's going after his former teammate slash Unity teammate slash former lover, Livewire, who was in trouble because of what happened in Harbinger Wars 2, and I'm not really going to talk about that at length because I don't want to spoil that. So it's the end of a book, and it's just another moment where I won't take the opportunity, but just to say that if I could jump on the soapbox and say that this is like part of the DMG acquisition Nick White Valiant conspiracy theory, I think it is, but we'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. If you want to know more about that, hit up Nick. Ask him about the conspiracy theory. I'm sure. Put on your tinfoil hat and contact Nick White.
Exactly. What about you, Paul?
This is one of those weeks where a bunch of my favorite books are coming out. The same week, the way that happens.
Choices.
So it's very tough to pick one. Exactly. You got the new Immortal Hulk coming out. You got new issue of Border Town. You got the second issue of Grant Morrison's Green Lantern coming out. But I decided to pick a number one book, because I like to pick a new number one when I do this. Yeah. My pick is Martian Manhunter number one, the new ongoing series about everyone's favorite Martian Manhunter, John Jones. This is written by Steve Orlando with art by Riley Rossmo. And exactly. I'm a sucker for Martian Manhunter to begin with. He's one of my favorite supporting characters. I'm always on the fence of whether or not he really needs an ongoing series, but I've liked the past couple ones that they've done. I really like the one that Al Ewing did. Was it Al? It was Rob Williams. The one that Rob Williams did a couple years ago. I always get them confused for some reason, but
the one that Rob DCU Williams did, run.
Yep, by Rob Williams. That was quite good. Although it really focused on the strangeness of Martian Manhunter, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
This book, well, of course, is being marketed as yet another book that'll change everything we know about John Jones, the Martian Manhunter. Based on what I've read, it feels like Orlando and Rossmo are going to focus more on the idea of John Jones, his alter ego as a detective, which I always thought was the most interesting part of the character. You have this Martian who comes to Earth, and in order to fit in, becomes a detective and uses his supernatural abilities to do detective work. That's a very interesting take on the whole, superhero alter ego dynamic. So the fact that they're kind of focusing on John Jones as a detective, as a beat cop, doing detective work, that's kind of interesting to me. And I really like the idea of putting artists that have sort of unconventional or highly stylized art styles on superhero books. So the idea of Riley Rossmo doing a weekly superhero or monthly superhero book is really, really exciting. I think it's going to be great. Especially a character like the Martian Manhunter who has such a distinct, iconic look. To have someone do a little different take on that could be really interesting.
And it does honestly feel like DC is less willing to entertain the idea of people breaking away from house style more than Marvel. Yeah. So it is nice when it comes along. So,
well, I question that because I just read the most recent issue of Justice League, and that had, it wasn't the whole issue, but it did have pages by Fraser Irving, who is one of the most stylized, unique artists out there. So having a person like that do, maybe a third of the issue, but still having him do a Justice League issue that's pretty amazing. That's not what people expect when they pick up an issue of Justice League. So
it does seem like DC recently has made some steps away from the New 52's edicts, if you will. Exactly.
No, I mean, that's definitely something I've enjoyed seeing is unconventional artists on superhero titles on DC. So, yeah.
If only because there are some people out there who are very furious.
Who probably don't want to see Fraser Irving drawing, Superman anytime soon.
They look at Riley Rossmo and they head immediately to the message boards. Yeah.
So I'm excited for that book, in addition to all the other awesome books coming out this week I mentioned. So, yeah, that's where we're at with that. So we will take a short break and then come back for our main topic, which is religious comics or maybe religion in comics. We'll see where the discussion goes. For our main topic of this week's episode, we decided to tackle a pretty major, discussion point, and that is religion. Religion in comics, comics that are religious, comic book characters that are religious, and how those things fit together. Is there room for religion in comics? I think we'll agree that there is, because we're talking religious in pretty broad terms here. We're talking about the way that a character expresses themselves through their faith, or a way that a creator expresses their faith through their work, or comic books that are commenting on religious topics. There's a lot to discuss here, so we're going to probably just scratch the surface, but I think there are a couple different angles we could take. So I'm just going to open the floor to Kait and Nick here and see if they have a topic that jumps off the top of their head if they want to talk about regarding religion in comics.
So the first thing that comes to mind when you say religion in comics is Will Eisner's A Contract with God, because it was one of the early great graphic novels, I feel like, and it's all about... Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's the term graphic novel comes from that. I think Will Eisner coined that term to describe that book, because it clearly wasn't, a comic book that was sold on the newsstand. I think he came up with the literal term graphic novel when he was pitching that book, and it is probably the first example of that term being used to sell a comic book. Yeah,
it was printed in 1978, and I think that the graphic novel phrase dates to around there. So yeah, I'm sure you're right. This story is about a Jewish man and his relationship with God. He basically writes a contract, which he holds himself to in relation to his promises to God early on in the book. But so much bad stuff happens to this guy that it's about his relationship with religion. So that's...
Yeah, and speaking of, creators that expressing their faith through books, I think that really is a almost autobiographical, or at least something Will Eisner is very passionate about, explaining his Jewish faith through that book. I mean, it's a really fantastic book. And I'm glad you brought it up because it didn't even cross my mind when I was thinking about this topic.
Yeah, it's very heavy to read. I mean, it's a very good book. I do recommend it. But man, that was an intense afternoon for me.
Yeah, and Will Eisner, I mean, his artwork is just, again, I think it's a very passionate topic for him because he expresses the what the experiences that man has in such amazing graphic detail. There's not that many like even words in the book. Just visually it's so stunning and expresses itself almost purely visually at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it talks about some of it's not just focused on this one character. There is some other stories about this character's community and things like basically the summer camp that all the families go to. That's the story that stuck with me the most, is about these people meeting other people, looking for their future spouses and trying to look more maybe well off than they really are. And I found that I think in comics, the religion of the characters has more to do with the communities and how they interact with one another than it really does about like seeing them in church or talking to God, as it does happen in this particular book.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. So we talk about religious characters. It becomes part of the character's background. So you don't expect to read a story where you see, Nightcrawler going to church every Sunday, but his Catholic faith, expresses itself in the way he acts among other people. So it becomes a part of the character's makeup, as opposed to, sort of the creator themselves proselytizing, to the reader. So I think we all have lists in the notes here of religious characters. Maybe we can kind of do that right now. I think characters like Nightcrawler, and Jean-Paul Valley, Azrael being Catholic, that is a big part of their character. Ben Grimm is canonically Jewish. A lot of Marvel characters are, because I think Jack Kirby put himself in the characters that way. And then I have Simon Baz, the Green Lantern, is Muslim, So I think those are elements to the character's background that make them more interesting and more well-rounded, because we know in our everyday lives people that have those faiths and express them through their everyday actions.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I guess I shouldn't have been, but how many of the early comic book creators were Jewish? And I found a couple of articles stating basically how they communicated that through their work, and then possibly why so many of the early creators were Jewish. And if I can find it in my notes, there was a article called Jews in Comic Books by Ari Kaplan, and it basically got into how when the comic books really started getting going back in, I think, the 30s, there wasn't a whole lot of places for Jewish people in society because they were so judged against, basically. So when comic books started getting big as a industry, they were looking for people that would work for almost nothing, and that included a lot of Jewish people. So it ended up becoming a very Jewish industry at first.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was really interesting and kind of upsetting.
I mean, I think that is interesting, because I think that their faith or their ideas become ingrained with the superhero medium. I mean, you think about Superman. Superman is a religious character. That is the story of Moses, literally. The story of the Superman coming to Earth, his parents putting him in a basket that's a spaceship, setting him down the river, across space, him landing on Earth, being taken in by a kindly couple. I mean, that is a messianic story inherently. And
right.
I think you can never take that away from it. It's always going to be there, part of the character.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's kind of interesting about that is something I noticed in an article about a book called Up, Up, and Oy Vey by Rabbi Simcha Weinstein. There's always an opportunity for me to ruin a name, so that's probably it for today. And he pointed out that the Superman origin mirrored the situation for many Jews in the 30s, aka many children being sent away to live abroad as the situation in Germany deteriorated. And I thought that was something that was kind of interesting. I'd never really made that. I mean, it seems so obvious, but I'd never made that connection of, oh, geez, that's exactly what was going on at the time. So.
I think it's really paved the way for comics to be the diverse place that it is, at least today. I think that it went through a rough period a couple of decades ago, possibly. I wasn't around then, so. But like you have the X-Men, which focuses on people that are outcast by society for a large part of the story, and then I think that's possibly where that is where that comes from, because of the people that created them.
Right.
Just the cultural message behind that. Again, with the community, though.
That's interesting. I think the X-Men, obviously you have Magneto being the most notable, character there who, due to his faith experienced, extreme trauma going through the Holocaust, and that becomes part of the character's story. And I think that's something that was added to his origin later on. I mean, once not there in the original, he was just sort of a bad guy, generic bad guy. But the character becomes so much more interesting in relation to his other, the other characters because of that added background that they gave him later on.
I'm always interested to see deities when they're actually a character in the comics, which I've never seen anybody actually put, like, the Christian God in a comic. But
sure.
I just read Animal Man, and the Red Gods were active side characters. Like, I thought it was really interesting that you have these gods, and the idea is that the gods determine what happens in the world, but when you're actually in the scene with Animal Man, the gods are just telling him what should or shouldn't happen, but aren't necessarily actually doing anything themselves. And I found that was a very similar thing to what happened with the gods that I saw in the early issues of the Buffy season 8 and 9 comics with Willow. I'm super out of date with that series. But again, it was just the gods telling Willow, what should or shouldn't happen, or the, they're sort of like influencing the pieces of the world, how the pieces move, such as Willow. But they're not actually like causing anything major to happen, from what I recall. So I think that it's fascinating that people will include these fictional deities in their comics, but it's almost like a commentary on how they view, the real life gods. Because we don't have people or deities coming down to Earth and changing things, but we do have priests, nuns, people, ministers,
people of religious
rabbis.
Orders, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what's always interesting in those situations is that comic book creators will set up these situations where you have something that's clearly a religious manifestation or whatnot, and then for me the question becomes, like, how does this change and shape the everyday person's worldviews and or religious perspective? And the book is like, no, we're not going to tackle that, Nick. What do you think this is? Are you serious? Like, we are not opening up that box of that can of worms. But you do see some interesting approaches. I've always found Neil Gaiman's Sandman to have some very interesting ideas about how to tackle the idea of religion and how to attempt to, and I read this so long ago, but attempt to create an interweaving narrative in which everything kind of actually falls in together because they're all stories, if I remember. I think it's Season of Mists. God, I'm going to be so wrong on this. Where Lucifer decides he doesn't want to rule hell anymore. I've got this part right. And he basically says, I'm outie. I'm gone. And then everybody else shows up and sort of not really argues, but attempts to sort out who's going to be in charge of hell now. And you have all these different deities that show up, and it was interesting. Definitely one of the best Sandman stories I enjoyed, even though I clearly can't remember most of it. It was a long time ago, okay? And some volumes of that book are weird. Like, honestly, like Sandman, it's like, people are going to be so mad when I say this, but it's like, read volumes like 1 through 3 and then read volumes like 9 through 11 or whatever. The in-between is weird. Anyway. Oh, you only want the volumes with Morpheus. Yeah, a little, maybe. Anyway, So
anyway.
I think that stuff like that is interesting. And another thing that I've always been kind of fascinated with, and you see a little bit, is kind of the interaction between sacred and secular culture. And with comic books, you see this a lot, certainly throughout the decades that comics have been around. There really hasn't been a shortage of religious commentary on comics themselves. Certainly, there were times when they were seen as, the scourge of the earth, to religious organizations who, in some ways, this is, I think, how you ended up with the Comics Code. I might just be really blanket statementing this here, but
that's exactly right. Yeah.
But certainly, they saw it as an evil, and. Which of course is so weird, because here are comic books essentially retelling the stories you want children to hear, but they're not going to hear it from you, or they're not going to absorb it, or they probably won't. And yet here are these other people that are more or less adapting, modifying, changing, but nonetheless telling your tales. And to you, they're they're the bad guys. And so you always have this you have these two groups of secular and sacred culture, playing off of each other. So Moses might become Superman, and then the religious groups see that and they go, well, we want our version of that. And so you get like Bible Man, right? So right. You have this constant.
Bible Man?
What is Bible Man? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically the people that make things like VeggieTales decided that they wanted their Batman, Superman, and you got Bible Man, basically, if that makes sense.
Right. Do you mention the Comics Code, too? Mm-hmm. I don't know what that is.
Oh, okay.
Paul, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so basically...
Like the 30-second version, basically.
Right. So in the mid-'50s, a lot of religious thinkers or, preachers and parent groups said that comic books caused juvenile delinquency. So there was a Senate hearing on this very topic, and it was decided by the comic book publishers, rather than going through some government regulation of comic books, they would get together and create a comics book code. Self-regulated group is called the Comics Code Authority, and basically from the 1950s up until the late 90s, every book that DC or Marvel put out had a little stamp on it that said approved by the Comics Code Authority, and it meant they couldn't put things like nudity, witchcraft,
certain depictions of violence. Yeah,
that was all sort of banned, and they got much looser as the decades went on. But for a long time, comic books were highly sanitized by this group called the Comics Code. So that's what that is. It's a really interesting topic in comic books history, and I think that's. I'm glad that it's gone, because it made comic books a lot more interesting, but I think the reason
await the return of the comic. No, I'm just kidding. I can't
clean
wait.
This stuff up. I don't know if you heard, Nick, but comics aren't just for kids anymore.
Yeah. Oh, no. I haven't. This is new.
No, but I think one thing is really interesting to me. The most fascinating thing about this topic with comics and religion is how the DC and Marvel universes incorporate spiritual and supernatural stuff into their cosmologies.
Oh yeah.
Why would you really need to have a character that is God if Superman exists? Or how does that make sense? How would the people in Metropolis still be religious, knowing that these supernatural beings are real, quote unquote, in their world? So I've always liked the idea. And one of my favorite things is the fact that they gave Krypton its own religion. So Superman and all of Kryptonians had a religion called Ra. They worshiped the sun god Ra. So I always like that in Silver Age comics, where Superman would exclaim, "Oh, my Ra," or "By the great Ra." It's he has his own god that he worshipped as well. This fascinating idea that, of course, a fictional universe would have its own fictional religion too. I've always loved that idea. I was going to say, in addition to that, you have the way the universes have incorporated the real, religion into their cosmologies, where there's so many analogs to Satan in Marvel comics. You have Mephisto, the son of Satan. There's so many different takes on that. And then DC, you have the demon, who's literally a demon. You have the Spectre, who's actually the actual spirit of God's vengeance. So God exists in the DC universe, and he manifests himself through the
Phantom
Spectre. Phantom Stranger, who, there's a couple different origin stories, but one of them is that he's actually Judas, You have Zoriel from Grant Morrison's Justice League run, who's actually an angel that fell from heaven. So it's like heaven and hell actually do exist in the Marvel and DC universes. They're just highly, they're very different the way I think we think about them day to day, but they're there in those universes in a different sense. I've always kind of liked that idea that they still held on to that stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that when you sort of like stop and try to really sort it out as to like, well, if this exists and that exists and this person's real, then like, wouldn't that change what people think? And it's like, don't ask those questions.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Not in this book, at least. One of the things that I find... Oh, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, I mean, like, our society today, in the U.S. at least, is very, like, technology heavy, and that has changed our society in the way that it functions a whole lot, but it hasn't changed our emphasis on a religion in society. We still have large communities of people with different faiths. So, I mean, I feel like it's kind of similar, where just because something new comes along that is large and powerful and life-changing, it doesn't mean that our sense of, like, something bigger goes away.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. So I think in some sense, I like the way that these fictional universes really are mirror images of our own. They really do reflect, our contemporary world views in some sense, or the way we understand the world. It's still there in this highly fictionalized universe.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. One thing that I will say that I find religion and comics, have quite in common, and this is something I studied a good amount back when I was getting my religious studies degree years and years ago, alongside my English degree, was eschatology, which is a branch of theology that's, according to, we'll go with the Oxford English Dictionary definition, which is something that's, it's a branch which is concerned with the death, judgment, and final destiny of the soul and humankind. And obviously, when you look at comic books like East of West or Sixth Gun, or any of these books that want to talk about bringing about the apocalypse, or what the apocalypse entails, or rapture, or things like this, these are questions that the sacred and secular communities have sort of attempted to, they've weighed in on for years now. So, and comic books are no different. Comic books, maybe it's a real interesting statement on our times, and I don't think it's an accident that not even American, world culture is obsessed with apocalyptic narratives right now. That's not an accident. That's our subconscious.
Well, hasn't that always been the case? You have the story of...
Oh, yeah, sure. The end times are near. And the end times are near. The end times are near. Yeah. And I think that's one of those things that anyone that's a creative person is going to express their thoughts about that through their artworks, which is why you have so many stories about that in every medium. I think what's interesting about comics is that it gives you a space where you can tell a story where the universe is completely destroyed, and then you have the way for it to get rebuilt. You know what I mean? You can run through every scenario of the world ending over and over and over again. Every crisis is the world just being destroyed and being rebuilt, And I like that idea that is a way the creators are expressing their thoughts about these religious or spiritual topics. I think of the interview with Jack Kirby that I always recommend people, is he talks about him creating Galactus, and he says, the Silver Surfer was a fallen angel, Galactus was a god, because he realized he couldn't just tell stories about gangsters anymore. He had to think bigger, and the way he thought bigger was to go to his faith or go to the Bible and to pull out these stories and these concepts. So that's where you get Galactus, Silver Surfer, all of the new gods. In the name itself, the new gods was his attempt to tell a sort of mythological religious story in a contemporary setting. So the fact that you have these recurring stories about the end of the world or about religion, that's because that's what the creators are interested in. That's how they're going to express it through their comics, right? Totally.
I feel like we can't talk about religion in comics without talking about Wicked and the Divine. I just talked about Wicked and Divine like 10 minutes ago, but that has to do with your idea of the mortality. Also, every 2 years, the gods, or rather, the gods are reborn every couple of decades, and then they only have 2 years to live, and then they die again.
Right.
And then the circle continues, or the cycle continues. Man, there's so much to say about this. I don't really know where to start. Here again, we have the characters are gods. They've got god powers, but they're the characters in the book, and they are on Earth affecting people. But it talks too about the comparison between divinity and celebrity, and how these gods are more celebrities rather than being planet changing, like earthquake causing gods.
Right.
And
well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, it just reminds me of the infamous John Lennon quote, how the Beatles are bigger than Jesus. And that's, I think, any sort of contemporary discussion about celebrity is going to say, like, celebrities are, in some sense, a new form of religion, a new pantheon of gods, in a sense,
Yeah, idols.
Oh, sure, yeah. Makes me think of the one issue of Grant Morrison's Multiversity, the universe where it's just celebrity obsessed.
Yeah.
Do you remember that one? I think Ben Oliver drew it.
Yep.
I think Laura's story. Laura is the main character, sort of question mark, in Wicked and Divine, especially in the first arc of the series, and she is kind of uninformed about the depth of how far the pantheon goes and all the backstory and such, as are the readers, which is the story. But it's really interesting to see how she becomes more informed and more things start happening, and she sees how the gods' actions affect the people around them, and the kind of the local communities around them that go to their parties and such, which has kind of fallen off in the later issues. I don't know where I was going with this.
Well, no, I do. What I remember from reading that book, again, I only read a little bit of it, but I did like the idea of that. The idea of there's a pantheon of gods, this idea that it kind of borrows from every religion, major or not, to kind of make that pantheon work. And I think that's an interesting idea because it kind of draws all these different strains or threads and mythologies together, in one story, which I think a lot of kind of what we're talking about now is the idea of like bringing in your personal faith or maybe an idea about faith you have and drawing it into a larger context. I think that book does that really well, the little bit I've read. Similar to, like, again, Jack Kirby, his idea of Asgard and Thor and the Norse religion is very different from the actual Norse mythology, but I like the idea is like, here's these great stories I can retell, with the superhero connotation that he does, that sort of look at religion through the lens of a superhero story in a sense. So I've always liked that kind of stuff. Are there particular stories maybe or issues that we can maybe recommend to people? Okay, there we go. I know Nick's got a list
Godzilla
here,
in Hell, if you want, probably. I'm half joking, but like, if you ever wanted to see basically Dante's Inferno meets Godzilla, it exists. It's a real thing. It's like 5 issues. Mega bonus first issue is drawn by James Stokoe, who is amazing. And yeah, it's when you read the behind the scenes work that went into it, like these artists, these writers were like very serious about going back and reading the Dante's Inferno and the original texts and reinterpreting things and there was a real cynical temptation to assume that it was a super goofy idea, and it is, but they approached it with such seriousness that it gains this level of respect that I didn't anticipate that it would have. Like, holy cow, like, who pitched this? Who approved this? And then, wow, what an end product. So that's a really interesting mashup. If you wanted something like that, that would be one that I would definitely embrace. Another one that easily comes to mind would be like Eternal Warrior. Has a lot of interesting questions about death and mortality, and what it means to be like this undying figure, and sort of what sort of ramifications that can have from like a world building perspective. Valiant sort of has that weird approach that you also see in like at least DC, because I know DC well enough, where you have spirits and sort of an afterlife place in the what is it called? The Dead Zone, I think. Yeah. So you have all these interesting semi-religious ideas going around, but no one's really attempting to juxtapose that alongside our ideas and our concepts of modern religion. So
yeah. Kate, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I mentioned A Contract with God earlier, and I just have to say that I read this maybe a year ago, and it has stuck with me, and I think about this a lot. And I could mention it way more often on the show than I do. So if you get the chance, if it's at your library, if it's on a sale sometime, I would grab it, and I do recommend, even if it takes you a while, to read that.
Yeah, that's a very good book. That gets a recommendation from me as well. It's been years since I read it. I should revisit that. But what I think is interesting, I've noticed some religious context in some recent Tom King comics. I think the last issue of Mr. Miracle felt like a very ponderous, religiously themed issue. And also he did that run on I think it was like a 3-issue little story in the Batman run, with a story with Dr. Freeze on trial, and Bruce Wayne is on the jury. That brings up a lot of religious topics, and I think a lot of readers assumed that Tom King was saying Batman is an atheist, and he said that's not the point. I wasn't crazy about that story overall, but I think there's some interesting ideas there, and I like the ambiguity that Tom King introduces. Does Batman have faith, and if so, what would it be? So that's an interesting story. But my highest recommendation, obviously, for a religious comic is the Fantastic Four story Hereafter. It's from issues 509 to 511, so it's going back a ways with the Fantastic Four. But it's written by Mark Waid, art by Mike Wieringo, I think, did the art on that one. But the story is that Ben Grimm died, and Mr. Fantastic finds out a way to go to heaven to retrieve his soul. So I love the idea of the Fantastic Four, like, we can scientifically figure out a way to go to heaven. That's the thing that can happen. So they go to heaven, and they meet God, or the creator, who's Jack Kirby. Like, it's actually Jack Kirby sitting at a drawing board, and he gives this beautiful speech about how he gave all of his creatures free will to write their own stories. It's a really beautiful story, and I think it was Mark Waid's tribute to Jack Kirby after he passed away. So if you're talking about religion in comics, of course I'm going to talk about Jack Kirby, or any topic in comics. So I'd highly recommend that story if you haven't read it. It's really, really quite good. So before we wrap up, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, that reminds me a lot of, there's a TMNT story that's basically a tribute to Jack Kirby, and he's... Gosh, I want to say he's this artist who has like a magical pencil, and he's able to like construct worlds just at a whim, with his notebook and this magical pencil. And yeah, it's your narrative there. Just it simply just brought this one to mind, and it's interesting because again, you have Kirby in this sort of magical, mystical creator role basically, which is that's essentially what a god is. So.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting.
It draws an interesting parallel between, free will versus predeterminism, which is obviously a religious topic, and the idea of being a creator, you creating your own life, being an artist in your own life. There's a lot to discuss there. There might be a second follow-up episode where we can dive deeper into that. So, yeah. Before we wrap up, does anybody have any other topics or suggestions we want to throw out real quickly?
Nothing.
I'll take that as a no. So. But if you're listening, if you have any recommendations or any other ideas about this topic, again, I think we just scratched the surface here. So please reach out to us and let us know what your favorite religious comics are, or any other things relating to this topic. So to do so, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow Kate at Kate L. Fear, is that right? I can never remember your Twitter handle. Okay. Find me at OhiPolly, and of course find the show at IRCB Podcast. We retweet polls and stuff all the time over there. I think a recent poll was how many books you bought over Black Friday weekend. I don't know what the current topic is, but I'm sure Mike will have something interesting for us to ponder over on Twitter.
We would also encourage you to go ahead and check out our Goodreads group. We have weekly threads all the time about what books you've read or questions about what book we should nominate for our next book of the month. Lately, I've seen a lot of just really friendly, helpful people on there. Just when anybody has a question about any book or what should I read next or what did you think about this, just people are receptive and interested. A really great community. It's fantastic over there. If you're not a member, I would say go check it out. Also, go ahead and head on over to ircbpodcast.com. We have a pronunciation guide for the names that I continually botch on this show week in and week out. And if you're not interested in seeing my mistakes corrected, we also have a merch store. We have shirts, we have stickers. I think zines are available for purchase. So
that's right.
Head on
also
over.
Free and digital.
Yeah, exactly.
Please rate and tell your friends about the show. If you haven't left a written review someplace, please do. It helps us and makes the show more awesome. You can email the show at ircb@destroythecybe.org, and you can also subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/ircbpodcast for exclusive audio, early access, and some cool stuff.
Cool stuff. Like Infinity Shred. They're the best, and they do the music for our show, so thanks to them. Xander edits the show. He's a top-tier wizard as well. I want to thank Kait and Nick for joining me for this topic, and thank you for listening. And until next time, be good to others and enjoy comics.